One of the things I don't think we do very well is death. I suppose in one sense that's because of the great advances that we have done, that we have achieved as a society with respect to medical advancements. It's very unusual now for a young person to experience the death of a loved one. Not uncommon, but a bit rarer than it was in the past. For this reflection on Holy Saturday, when Jesus sleeps in the tomb and thereby consecrates the grave to be a bed of hope for them that sleep in him, I'm actually sitting next to our own son's grave, Daniel. He died in 1999 after a very brief illness, which only took a week for him to die. And that has been a profoundly life-changing event for Alice and myself and for our family. But just behind us there is another grave site where there is 8 children who were buried there in the 1800s, and the parents in the early stages of the 20th century followed their children and were thereby reunited with their loved ones in death. The parents came to this same site year after year after year, and I think the biggest gap is actually about 2 years, I think, between burying children. Alice and I only had to do it once. I can't imagine how on earth a parent continually visits the gravesite to bury a child year in and year out. There is one example of sitting at the graveside in the Gospels that is really helpful for us as we reflect on the issue of sitting at the graveside of Jesus on Holy Saturday. And I suspect one of the reasons why we try not to dwell too much on Holy Saturday is because sitting at a graveside is unbelievably and profoundly disturbing. I'm here, it's a beautiful day, the wind is just blowing beautifully, but it's just silence. You can hear the traffic in the background, but otherwise it's just so incredibly quiet. And so I am just left here with my own thoughts about Daniel, about Alice and myself, and what may or may not have been had Daniel survived and lived. But in the Gospels there's this amazing story of one who sits at the graveside of her much loved brother. It's in chapter 11 of John's Gospel, and I'm talking about Lazarus. In that story, Lazarus, Jesus' great mate, falls ill, and despite word being sent to Jesus, the one whom you love is ill, Jesus waits where he is and makes sure that by the time he gets there, not only has Lazarus died, not only have they had the funeral, but he has been in the grave for 4 days. This is quite significant because in that culture, the people of the day believed that the spirit of a dead person hovered around the body of the deceased for up to 3 days. And thus, when we look at the example of Jairus' daughter and also of the widow's son of Nain, that would have been within the 3 days. And so when Jesus raises those two people from the dead, while they're still incredulous, there could be some explanation that the spirit had returned to that person. But in this case, in the case of Lazarus, there can be no justification, if you like, for why Lazarus is eventually raised from the dead. Because the 3 days has elapsed, Lazarus is incredibly dead, and what's more, corruption has started to sink in. And so when Martha meets Jesus at the tomb of Lazarus, she gives him the rounds of the kitchen. "If you had been here," she says, "my brother would not have died. But even now I know that whatever you ask of him, of God, he will grant you." Jesus' response to her is quite enigmatic. "Your brother will live," or "your brother will rise," actually. And Martha says to him, "Yes, I know he'll rise on the last day." And what Martha is expressing is something of the hope of Israel at the time, that the dead will rise at an appointed time, all of the dead, and the righteous will be allowed to live with God, and the unrighteous will have to return to where they had come from. And so Martha is expressing something of this hope to Jesus. And Jesus responds to her in an even more enigmatic style. You're right, Martha, to hope in this, but what you're hoping for is not an event, but is a person. And he says it like this: I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever lives and believes in me, even though he dies, yet will they live. And whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? And Martha, of course, replies, yes, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. What's going on in that story? Well, in that story, Jesus is explaining to Martha, and John explaining to us, that death is not the end. It certainly is for this life. It certainly is for Daniel. And it certainly is for everyone else who is in this cemetery. But there is a hope that we don't have to wallow in anguish and despair when somebody dies. The old prayer book put it beautifully: thereby sanctifies the grave to be a bed of hope for them that sleep in him. This place is a place of hope. It might be seen by some to be a place of despair, but it's really a place of hope. It's a place of hope because in this place we can trust that just as Jesus slept in the grave on Holy Saturday, yet he rose on Easter Day, so all those who sleep in him may also have hope that at the appointed time they too, and we too, will be raised to new life. It's certainly true that we have to sleep. It's certainly true that we have to die. But it's not true that this is the end and that there is nothing else for us except this. The death and resurrection of Jesus, including Jesus sleeping on Holy Saturday in the tomb, is a promise for us that this is not the end. Jesus has truly experienced life, death, and the grave, but there's also new life, new hope. And so for those of us who sit at the gravesite, we can sit at the gravesite in the silence, in the ambiguity, but we can do all of that in hope that although this seems to be the end, the resurrection of Jesus for tomorrow says this is not the end. When we place our faith and trust in the Lord Jesus, even if we die, yet shall we live. And whoever lives and believes in the Lord Jesus will never die. The Lord be with you.